Hey, welcome back to Beats Learning, the podcast where we pull back the curtain on the music industry and chat with the people making things happen behind the scenes. Today's guest is someone with a serious track record when it comes to championing artists and building communities. She's worked across major labels, led global charities, and most recently headed up AIM, the Association of Independent Music. She's smart, passionate, and certainly not afraid to shake things up. In this episode, we dive into her journey, the future of the indie scene, and what it really means to support artists in today's landscape. But before we jump in, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe and share it with anyone who loves music as much as we do. It really helps us grow and bring on even more amazing guests. Well, now that's done, it's a pleasure to welcome Silvia Montello. So, Silvia, thank you so much for coming on Beats Learning. How are you?
It's my pleasure. I'm very well. I'm very happy today. The sun's shining and yeah, life is good at the moment.
That's what I like to hear. Very happy guest. It
Yes.
always makes for a better show.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed anyway.
Well, yeah.
Well, look, I'm going to jump straight into this because obviously I've interviewed a couple of guests now and obviously done my research into a fair few others that are coming on soon. And I must say, your career / CV, wow, impressive is to say the least, right?
Thank you.
Now, I'm actually going to have to pick up the iPad for this one because if I look, you've got a career spanning 35 years, not to bring up your age in any way. So.
No, I'm happy to talk about my age because it's only going in one direction.
Yeah, same as us all, man.
Yeah.
Same as us all. But look, you like to run off some of your roles. You're the former CEO of Association of Independent Music, the former CEO of Association for Electronic Music. You're the divisional director at Universal Music, Group SVP at BMG, Cobalt. You're head of operations at Audio Network. You've now got Remarkable. You've got Voicebox Consulting. That's not to then mention some of the other roles you've got, like, once again, you're still on the executive board of AFM, if I'm not mistaken. You're the global advisory board member of In Place of War, the mentor for Key Change US and Berkeley, Valencia, the chair of Charity Last Night, DJ Save Life. The list literally goes on. I could sit here all day and just list what you've done. Where did this all start? Because that is a phenomenal career. As I say, what was day one for Silvia?
Gosh, it depends how far back you want to go, but so I always knew that music was going to be the thing that I wanted to do because it's the only thing that drives me at all. So, did a music degree, spent my early days learning instruments, singing and choirs and playing instruments and everything. So I went to university and then came out of it thinking, okay, well, I need to get a job now.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
And, a music degree, a BSc in music degree. So it was more sort of technical than just kind of, learning the same stuff that you'd learned at school. And so I thought, okay, well, record shops need sales assistants. So I sent my CVs around to a few record shops and our price needed somebody to run the classical department in their shop in Covent Garden because I knew about classical, obviously, classically trained as I was. So, I started by working in a shop selling records to people.
So I'm just going to come back to something you just said. Classically trained. You mentioned choir. You mentioned instruments. Yeah. Can you elaborate? What do you mean classically trained? Tell me about that.
So, okay, so rewind a bit more. My dad was always a big music lover, but he never had a chance to learn to play instruments. And I grew up in a house where there was a piano. And, sometimes I'd sort of, I'd go up following my dad around and hear him kind of, trying to just play a few little tunes on the piano. And then I started doing the same and we sort of realised that I had some kind of talent for music. So started learning the piano when I was 7.
Oh, wow.
Singing in the junior school choir. I actually performed one of my own pieces when I was 8 or something, which is really embarrassing.
Sorry, you composed your own piece at 8 years of age?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was embarrassing, though, because I didn't expect to be hauled up to do it or whatever. But, I mean, it's always been in me, I suppose. And then I I learnt, I did vocals, singing. I joined a church choir. And through that, I then learnt to play the viola. I learnt the bass guitar at school. Recorder and just anything I could get my hands on, I just sort of played. So, played in the school orchestra, and then at university I was in a madrigal choir singing old Italian madrigals. Also in the orchestra, playing the viola not very well, and majored in piano, but then I didn't pass the grade, so they said to me, we'll let you carry on into the second year if you promise you're never going to touch the piano again. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine, I'll just stick to singing. So yeah, I've been classically trained since I was a kid.
Amazing. And is that still something you do? Do you still sort of kind of jump on at the piano, or do you get anywhere near the viola?
Nowhere near the viola. That episode of my life is probably best for God's sake. But the piano, I mean, I still play keyboards. If I had a piano at home, which I don't because I'm in a flat, but it's too small for a piano. But yeah, I would still play, and I still sing. Largely just for my own benefit now, but I joined a gospel choir a few years back, and then I joined a sort of jazz singing tiny choir. So singing is probably the thing that I would go back to like a shot.
Amazing. Yeah. And so do you feel that that's affected a lot of what you're doing now? I know I don't mean to jump ahead too much. Obviously, we're going to come back to how your career sort of embellished and sort of going to move forward. But do you find that your background in actual sort of kind of instruments and singing affects what you're doing now at all?
I think it's had a huge impact on my career in music because of just understanding what it's like to perform.
Absolutely,
so you know, we when I was young, so from the age of 11 probably till my mid-20s, we performed on some very big stages. Mostly collectively, but singing on the Royal Albert Hall stage, singing at Covent Garden, St Mark's in Venice. We did some pretty cool stuff. And because I was too young to be scared about it. It was just something that I sort of grew up with, and sort of understanding what it feels like to perform, what it feels like to make music with other people and have that passion. And I think that's driven how I feel about music and how I feel about the business of music, because I always remember that at the heart of it, there is somebody who is putting their heart and soul either into performing or writing or producing the music. And it's, we call it an industry, but for the people where it's basically your calling, it's way more than that. And it's not just about data and numbers. It's about creativity, and it's about nurturing the human and the creativity to make sure that they can express and create the best music possible. So it has, it's definitely shaped. It shaped my understanding of music, and it shaped how I listen to things, because I do tend to sort of analyse a piece of music that I listen to in whatever genre, just because I know how to do that. So I'm always thinking about how it's constructed, the melody, the chords, just the sort of sequencing of things. I'm a real nerd when it comes to stuff like that.
See, that's fantastic, right? But that's a good thing, though, right? When you've got that education, that experience, that knowledge, but then you're able to then take that into sort of the leadership roles that you've had of late, and obviously still what you're doing with the likes of VoiceBox, etc. That the benefits that you can bring to the table, and that, as I say, that understanding, that experience is phenomenal. How do you think that's kind of once again shaped you in a sense of the type of coaching or the type of consultancy you do now then?
It's very much focused on music and the people that create the music, and also then the fans that engage with that music and that sort of relationship. So even though a lot of the roles that I've had are very sort of commercial, strategic, it is, very sort of operational at times and very number crunching. Where I know my passion lies, and the sorts of projects that really get under my skin and I really enjoy are the ones where I'm actually working with music that I love, or working with people that are engaged in that music that I love. So in terms of VoiceBox and the things that I'm doing now, I'd probably struggle to get really passionate about working with somebody where I just really wasn't interested or really feeling the music at all.
Of course.
I mean, I did, there's one time years ago when I first did my consulting after I left Universal, where I did end up taking on a jazz saxophonist as a client, and anyone that knows me from old knows that I absolutely hate the saxophone. And especially that kind of, bless him, he was very talented, but it wasn't sort of cool jazz. It wasn't the kind of hip stuff that people can get really noodly about. It was a bit more kind of cruise ship stuff. And so looking back on it, it's like, well, I was intrigued by the marketing aspect that I was helping with, but the being invited to actually go and see him play, I'd have to sort of grin and bear it, rather than kind of spring there going, of course I want to come to your gig in front of loads of high net worth individuals in some swanky place where you're going to be playing cover versions on a saxophone. But I think lesson learned. It was nice, but it wasn't the best thing that I've ever worked with in my life. So yeah.
Well, look, I'm very conscious of jumping around because I got really excited about that. That was actually a quick one question on that. What is the soundtrack of Silvia? If you were to pick any type of music, what would you listen to?
Oh, God. I mean, ask my husband. It is jungle and drum and bass.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. That is.
Oh, my God. I wasn't expecting that.
That is the soundtrack to my life.
Amazing.
And it's pretty much what I listen to during the day, every day.
Fantastic.
Not exclusively, because I like so many different genres for so many different reasons. But if you're talking about the thing that I would sort of live and die to, it's jungle and drum and bass.
So is there an event back in the day, or even nowadays, that stands out to you as a bit of a highlight? I know I was a massive Nicky Black Market fan back in the day, and you get MC Det, Skibber, Shabba, X-Man, all of them coming on.
I'm so glad that you know all of those guys, because
I had my days in drum and bass and jungle. I assure
amazing, because all of those guys, when they were still kids, so we're talking like mid 90s, I guess. A bunch of us were running club nights and sort of promoting kind of semi-illegal, like quite scratchy kind of...
The better types of
raves. And my mates were all brilliant at playing drum and bass, and things, Skibber and X-Man, they were just like jumping on the mic and doing stuff with them before obviously they got to where they got to. And we just sort of took it for granted at the time. But and they were just they were kids with the jeans hanging halfway down the backs of their legs, that kind of vibe. And in fact, I won't mention which one it was, but it was brilliant. One time, my mates were doing an internet radio show. And one of the MCs was MCing, and there was the point where they got a bit lively, and the trousers just fell. That it was like a priceless little moment, because it's like this kid's being so cool and being an amazing MC, and still MCing whilst trying to wrestle the trousers back up with one hand.
Amazing.
Love it.
Not too bad. That's fantastic. You've absolutely thrown me with that, and to be honest with you, I think that's fantastic. And as I say, it's actually getting a bit of not to once again to kind of digress. I've noticed, and I don't know whether obviously someone that listens to it regularly from the sounds of it, I don't know whether this is your perception is the same, but it's getting a bit of a second life recently. There's quite a number of new acts coming through, the same as UK Garage, right? I kind of think they're all having their heyday, as you say, like the mid-90s to say late 2000s. You had this sort of kind of time where it was really the pinnacle of UK music, and obviously that was subsequently taken over by lights of grime, and it kind of had its all the variations, but it's coming back.
It's back. I mean, it's we could talk about it later, but a couple of the projects that I'm working on at the moment, please, I mean, it's literally that, I've been joking to people, my mission is to make 2025 the year of jungle and drum and bass, like properly celebrate it, because, we're in the fourth decade of this genre that is so uniquely British. and unique. There's no other genre that has come from any other place that sounds like jungle and drum and bass. It could only have come from here, and it still feels like it hasn't been given quite the kudos that it deserves, because it's now arguably bigger than it's ever been. If you look at it globally, it's it's having another massive sort of peak in the UK, but it's also like really taking off in so many other countries, where people are sort of taking drum and bass and jungle and then actually also sort of combining it with their local sounds or their local instruments, and sort of creating their own new subgenres with it. And because I'm an old raver and an old junglist, it's just it makes me really, really happy. It's like we're having our moment, and so we've got to celebrate that moment and get as many people talking about it and appreciating the music and the people who were there right at the forefront, also right the way through to the people that are doing interesting and new things with it now, because it does constantly evolve. I'm not having anyone sit and tell me that it all sounds the same.
I can tell you it doesn't. I'm a fan too. In fact, just to give you a bit of a backstory for me, I grew up in Gravesend. That's kind of my main sort of kind of teenage years, and literally I was a hop, skip and jump away from Biting Back Records. Now, if you recognise that name, you'll know obviously it was owned by Mickey Finn.
Yes.
Which back in the day was literally the place where some huge DJs, your likes of Cole Cox and various others, that went there to go and get their vinyls. And obviously I was very young at the time, and so there was a lot of the time it was kind of sneaking in and just seeing, because you've got like these superstar DJs of now just in there, just on the turntables, just listening to new vinyls. So it was going, it was like that was the thing for me, to be honest, that actually sort of kind of really built the idea of like, I love music, I want to be part of this again. Just seeing these people in there, just going through the records. There's a lot of people still do. I think digital distribution's got rid of that a little bit.
It's such a shame.
Just you click instead of
I mean, the days of like spending Saturdays basically just flicking, like going through racks of vinyl, and that is how I spent every weekend. At that point, I was DJing different genres partly because my friends were already so good at DJing jungle and drum and bass. I'm like, well, the world doesn't need the world or our clique doesn't need another person, so I'll go and find something different that will be my thing.
So I just want to jump in there. That's one thing that was never mentioned in any of the to and fro we've been doing before today's episode, that you were a DJ. Well, that's not anywhere in any of your notes.
I know, which is ridiculous. I keep thinking actually that I've got versions of a CV that actually do have a little bit about the fact that, I started DJing in the 90s. I got my own decks in 98, and I went through a few different genres before I sort of settled on what my thing was. So I had I had a little bit of a flirtation with garage when I first started, which is probably the hardest thing to decide to learn how to DJ on.
It really isn't the easiest, I'll give you.
So you've got key clashes, beat matching, you need to be...
A load of melodies in of them.
Loads of different stuff.
Vocals,
I don't know what I was thinking. I went to trance after that, which was a lot easier. I had my... I still got my trance and my sort of hard trance records, the better ones I've still got. But then it was when I kind of went into the deep New York house, the Tenaglia type stuff, the sort of queer New York type, tribally lovely, and just doing these, proper long mixes. Like you just mixed 2 records for as long as you could, sounding brilliant.
Love it.
That's where I found my sort of groove with that stuff, and then also the kind of commercial sort of vocal house type stuff as well. So I only actually started DJing with drum and bass just before lockdown. I had my first ever gig where I played drum and bass, and then lockdown happened, and that's been it. But
the point is you're still doing it now. That's fantastic.
We just invested in one of the Pioneer Opus Quad all-in-one controller. I'm building my playlist of the jungle and drum and bass records that I want to stay, and then I'm gonna have to learn how to how to use it, because I DJ vinyl, I've used CDJs, but I haven't done.
I've got my 1210s in there. Yeah, set of Mark IIs.
I've got 1200s. We call them the Silver Twins.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And you've got, if you look down there, I've got a lot of trance.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
So that's why I actually started as. So obviously bedroom DJing, garage and drum and bass, the same, right? And exactly as you say, the worst thing to learn to try and mix on. In fact, the first time I ever tried DJing, I had a 2-channel mixer, but I actually had a CD Walkman. And yeah, I know. So you could.
Wow. Okay.
Don't get me wrong. Everything was completely clashing. You couldn't change the speed. You couldn't start. You couldn't do anything like that. But I thought I was cool because I was doing up and down on the volume. So that was as close as I got
the
to.
crossfader going.
Yeah, exactly. But then I actually. So when I first properly started DJing out, I was trance as well. Yeah. And I did a lot for the Gallery and Ministry of Sound and various other sort of kind of promoters across London. Trance Sanctuary. Hopefully getting Mark Landrigan, the runner of that, on soon. But anyway, look, we're completely digressing. That is a beats learning first right there. Silvia Montello being the superstar drum and bass DJ that she is.
Well, in the future, hopefully, yes. Yeah.
So so let's actually get back to what we started talking about, which was the start of your career. Now, obviously, you've just given a great insight into sort of further sort of kind of pushing the envelope for you with regards to building on your music career. Where did they say, and obviously make sure I phrase this question right, obviously you got your job in a record store, etc. What was the first real sort of opportunity that gave you that entrance into the industry, let's say?
Well, when I was working in the record shop, they actually had a job going at head office for an assistant buying manager. So back then, I worked for Our Price, which used to be a huge chain of record stores. Yeah. We reached about 300 or more at that point when I was there. And they needed somebody to basically buy the classical and the jazz and anything that wasn't your kind of mainstream chart music. Yep. So I applied for it and got it. So that sort of kicked me off more on the industry side because I was, my month was taken up with meeting about 45 different labels who'd come to me, go through all their new releases, give me the sales pitch, and I'd have to figure out which ones would work.
Okay.
Which ones were a little bit too niche, but then also, different shops had different size departments. So
how did you do that back in the? Sorry to jump in, but how did you do that back in the day? Obviously, one of the things you mentioned a second ago is obviously, these days we're just riddled with data. You've got more data than you could possibly imagine. But obviously back then, what was it? Just purely by ear, whether you like it or not? How would you decide what went on the shelves and what didn't?
I think I was trying to sort of, understand the typical buyer that would go into an Our Price. It wasn't a specialist store, so I had to be careful in some of the smaller stores. You could only really get away with putting in a small range of the fairly obvious kind of standards from the classical repertoire. So when people would come in, I'd have to judge whether, based on the price, based on whether it was an orchestra or a conductor or a soloist that people might have heard of. But then going right up to the bigger stores that were able to take some of the more interesting kind of repertoire. Okay. So, in all honesty, I was using what I'd learned through, doing my A-level and degree. And then learning the commercial side of it. And then, you would get the reports about what was selling and what wasn't selling. So I would just be continuously learning from that, going, okay, we over-egged the pudding on that, but this is doing really well. So it just sort of gives you indication. I kept learning as the data was coming in and sort of just, I was going to say making it up as I go along. That was not quite that, but you learn as you go along.
Absolutely, more experience and data than anything.
Yeah, absolutely that. Yeah.
Fair play. So then, where did that kind of go from? Because obviously, buying manager, fantastic. What an entry.
Yeah.
And where did that go then?
Well, actually, that went into my first ever redundancy. So.
Oh God, I keep tripping myself up on these.
No, not at all. It's really important to talk about redundancies because because people can think it's the end of the world, and actually, in my case, they were doing a restructure. About 40 people from head office were going. And I was one of them, and, I was probably 21 at this point. So it was my first kind of, the first big job.
Especially after uni, right?
After uni. And it was a bit of a weird time, but strangely, on the day that I got made redundant, I had a phone call from a job that I'd applied for that originally had offered the job to somebody else, but then they pulled out. So they rang me and said, do you want to come and join us after all? So it was quite good in a way because the job I was going to was better. It was better paid. It was more interesting. And I got to use my redundancy money to pay off my credit card bills and have a couple of weeks off over the summer until I started at the next job.
And what was that?
That was retail and sales executive for a classical and jazz publishing company. So jazz. It's called Gramophone. I think it still exists, but not as an independent company. Basically, Gramophone magazine was like, the connoisseur's classical music magazine. And it sold around the world. And my job was to basically sell it into all of the stores around the UK that could sell classical music magazines, run promotions with them, set up kind of, in stores and signings and various things, and basically just promote the magazine and the books and directories that we were publishing. So that... again, that got me driving around, seeing different parts of the UK, dealing with some very, very strange people who ran classical record shops. Love them, but so that there are different breeds sometimes, in a very nice sort of nerdy way. And it sort of helped me because it threw me in the deep end because I'm, painfully shy. I was painfully shy growing up and very awkward, nerdy, intellectual sort of person. And with this job, I just had to get over that. I had to just be able to walk into a place in a city I'd never been to before with people that I'd never met and strike up a conversation and figure out how to learn to sell.
Of course.
So, sometimes there's nothing like just being jumped in at the deep end and off you go, sink or swim. So, and that's what happened. So it was a really good learning curve.
Once again, it's the experience element of it that's obviously clearly led to your sort of kind of broad understanding and the reason why you've been able to achieve a lot of these sort of leadership roles. Well, certainly one of the things that I noticed when kind of going through the CV is obviously in the early days, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit from where you are there, but obviously you worked with some of the major labels as we saw, like BMG, Universal, etc. also, but then you kind of transitioned across to really being an advocate of the independent artist sort of scene. What did you learn from working with these sort of kind of bigger, broader household names, so to speak, that you then transitioned or took with you to the independent artist services?
I mean, Universal was the big kind of major label role that I had, and I was there for a long time. That was the longest place that I've ever worked, over 14 years. And I started in classical there, but then sort of moved across into everything that wasn't classical and jazz. And I learned an enormous amount about the music industry and how it works commercially, as well as the politics behind it. And, started to sort of try and learn how it all pieced together. But there were things that I began to learn and understand about artist contracts.
Okay.
About how the artist, the sort of in perpetuity, you sign your rights away to somebody and then you have a sort of royalty-based deal that means that until you're fully recouped from the advance, you don't get paid any royalties, all that kind of stuff. And also realising that with those sorts of deals, a lot of the creative control and vision can kind of be taken away from the originator of the music, because ultimately big labels are there to take the raw materials and turn it into something that they know is going to be commercially successful. That's what they do, and that's why they exist. Fine. But it doesn't suit every artist,
of course,
obviously. And I think that I just sort of started thinking, is this actually right? And is this fair?
Is this for you as well?
And is this for me? And I've told this story a few times to people, but the last year that I was at Universal was in that period of time towards the end of the noughties, where downloads had been happening, then streaming came in, physical sales had been going through the floor, but digital wasn't making up the shortfall in between. And there were a few years there where the music industry was running around pretty desperate about the fact that it was losing money and didn't really know how to make it up quickly enough. So it all became so much more about the numbers and not about the quality of the music. And obviously, with my background of actually really caring about music and caring about interesting music as well, and a variety of music, I think the thing that sort of killed it for me in my head was that the entire year, our commercial year and everyone's bonuses in that year depended on 2 albums performing really well.
Oh, really?
And those 2 albums were the Black Eyed Peas and Cheryl Cole.
Oh my God.
Cheryl Cole's solo album. And
No
I think I just sort of had this kind of like, what am I doing? This isn't, I was running the catalogue marketing division. So I was working with like crate digging. We were digging into the amazing catalogues, like the soul catalogues, soul and blues and jazz. I was able to work the Motown label, which is probably, one of the most brilliant things. Absolutely. I was like a kid in a candy shop. So, and everything from like pre-war, like pre-Second World War music, all the way up to Ronnie Size and Photek. I was working across this amazing amount of music. So to have the success of a whole year dependent on a solo album for somebody that... Sorry.
I'm going to make that louder in the actual real podcast.
Apologies to any Cheryl Cole fans out there.
Very much down Cheryl Cole's watching.
So probably not going to trouble Cheryl Cole. But I just felt a bit soul destroyed.
Absolutely. I'm not surprised.
Actually, when I left halfway through the following year, and I was kind of, by that point, I was quite demoralised with the music industry and went off and I set my consultancy up to work in the charity sector for a while because I just needed to do something completely different.
Just giving back a little bit.
Yeah, it's like I need to do something worthwhile. Exactly. So, and I actually, I kind of stopped listening to music for about a year as well because, I don't know, it was almost like it was so done. Yeah, and worked in the charity sector, learning about a completely different type of industry or different type of business with very different people, and it operates entirely differently. And then I got sort of reeled back in through the consultancy to do a project for BMG. So BMG, the new BMG is the one that I worked for. Okay. And they were actually one of the pioneers of the artist-friendly model. Okay. So they would work with artists on much more of a kind of profit share or JV style where, the artist controls their own rights, but they license them for a period of time and for an agreed kind of contract. They have more approvals over the marketing spend and approvals over how their project is worked. Okay. And it just instantly felt much more how the balance between label and artist should be. Artist friendly. It does what it says on the tin. And, the further my career's gone, the more those sorts of models have become way more the norm now than the old school models, which are, they can be and have been really quite exploitative. So it felt like it sat with my ethics as well. That people should get paid fairly for their work and for their art, and they should have enough control over it because it's theirs. It comes from them. You know, making music is an incredibly personal thing. So, you know, if I'd ever gone down the road of being an artist myself, I would have hated the idea of just signing it over and then have somebody else do whatever they wanted with it, or make me wear the clothes that they wanted me to wear. All of that thing. It was just like a massive wake-up call, I suppose.
Yeah. Like, if not, obviously, I'm going to be a little bit naive here. Now, obviously, for the likes of BMG, who are obviously a big brand, a big household name, obviously very similar to Universal in that sense. How do you think that kind of would be reflected by a more sort of by a smaller label then? Because obviously BMG have got a bit of money to throw at marketing. They've got this, they've got that. In fact, one of the things I was talking to Andy McDougall about in my last podcast is, you know, I think there's something like 100,000 new tracks a week that are uploaded to the likes of Beatport. Now, that's a lot of noise, and obviously trying to get yourself heard in amongst that is next to impossible, especially when you look at the ever-increasing subgenres in electronic music, for example, and obviously every other music, let's be frank. For a smaller label who don't have the budget to go and spend loads, but obviously do want to get the good music on from the up-and-coming artists, what would you say to them, obviously, in regards to your comments a second ago about kind of this fair, because both parties are trying to win and build on that one. Do you have any sort of advice for people in that scenario?
Advice to labels. I mean, you know, obviously the smaller the label and the smaller the budgets, what tends to happen is you just have to be more creative with how you go about building the audience for and with the artists that you're working with. And finding cute and clever, cost-effective ways of being able to grow that audience and reach those fans. So, you know, it's not all about throwing money at people. Absolutely, it's actually, you know, some of the better, most innovative and creative people have come from those smaller labels because, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So, you know, if you're working for a big company that has massive marketing budgets that you can afford to sort of throw the money around, and if it fails, it doesn't matter too much. You don't learn as much from that.
Agreed.
And you don't push, you know, the boundaries. And, you know, I suppose in a way we could have been criticised at some point that the way that we sort of marketed some things when I was at Universal, it could be quite cookie cutter. We would have an idea, okay, you know, we'll advertise it in this print magazine.
You fit this cat box.
You know, you know, it's almost like we'll come up with a marketing plan and you're just changing the name of the artist and the title and the release date at the top. But a lot of the other principles could be quite similar. And that's obviously that goes out the window when you don't have those sorts of budgets. And actually, you should never really market in a cookie cutter way because every artist is different.
Absolutely.
But, you know, there is a tendency just to get a bit lazy when you can. Smaller labels can't. So, you know, think about the fan of that artist. So really sort of understand the demographic and think about where that fan lives. Where are they going to find out about their music? What sorts of things do they engage with? And some of those aren't expensive to reach. And it's certainly not about throwing loads and loads of money away trying to get playlist campaigns on the bigger platforms, especially if you're working with more kind of niche and interesting genres. Because the major platforms, or at least the one big one beginning with S, that's not what it's there for. You know, that if you think about the big global platforms, it's more like in the days when supermarkets would have their TV compilation CD section, and it's like you would sell a lot of a few things to people who didn't really care about music, but they bought one or two albums a year that they quite liked. And it was normally a compilation or a greatest hits or something, or they'd buy it as a present for somebody else. That's kind of what Spotify and playlists, those are the people that really they're appealing to. They're not appealing to people like me or you that will find some kind of weirdness and some amazing, interesting artist, and just like deep dive into it. You're not gonna find them on the big platforms. No. So it's, you have to tailor to the music that the artist is making and where the audience for that music lives, and be a bit cute and a bit smart. And I know it's a difficult thing to say that, because a lot of artists will still expect, even with an artist friendly contract where they don't get big advances or whatever else, they can still expect over and above what a label is able to give. So then the advice is be really tactical about who you sign.
Of course.
And I can say this from experience, even at our own little label, Remarkable, when we first started, we were signing music on the basis of the potential of the music. And in one instance, actually, we got really far up to release date, but got so annoyed with the artist their attitude and their approach, that we ended up having to write them the Dear John letter, about a couple of weeks before the release, because it had just got to the point where it wasn't a good fit. It's like
enough's enough.
Enough's enough. It's like, we are partnering on this. We're putting energy and time and some money into doing this, and it needs to be a good relationship. And some relationships start off well and go sour, but if you're a small label and you can't afford to be wasting time and money on the wrong artists, then be tactical about who you're signing and making sure that actually you can come up with that sort of partnership, and work together and hopefully grow together, which is that's the holy grail of signing an artist. Their career grows, you're with them, they stay with you, and 20, 30 years later, that relationship is still there.
I had Alex Branson on a couple of months ago. Obviously, I know you know Alex very well. And he was talking about label Radar. And there was actually a little feature that he mentioned about that. Big shout out to Derek Clark. He was a little feature that he mentioned, which I thought was amazing. And it was this ability to give, the fans access through an app or a website where they can actually hear snippets of sort of kind of new tunes, new artists and things like that. What a fantastic way to engage.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And, it's a tactic that I see people using on Instagram, when they've got like 5 or 6 new tunes, and they will just post going, okay, like, what do you reckon? Which one of these is your favourite? And it gets people engaged, and it is a little snippet, and it's just, actually there is no harm getting feedback from your fans about what they actually want and what they actually like. In fact, that's something that I would recommend that people do, because too often that dynamic has turned into the artist or label just selling stuff to the fans. It's a one-way push rather than a two-way engagement. And where the real magic lies is when you get that two-way engagement, and the fans really feel like they have bought into you, not just the tunes, but they feel like they're part of the family. They're part of that clique, and their opinion matters. That's the holy grail, and that's what people should be aiming for.
So, what, if you don't mind me asking, what's your thoughts then on sort of kind of on social media itself? Obviously, look, there's absolutely phenomenal and massive benefits naturally, and I think they're pretty obvious in certain ways, right? And obviously, there's going to be a lot of cons as well. But at the same time, if let's say you're an up and coming artist, and let's say you submitting to Remarkable. How important is it for them to have this big social media presence? Because, if you're an artist and you focus on your music, that's what you do. A lot of these people, a lot of these artists, they don't care, or don't. They're not an expert on how to market or how to post. So whether it becomes too daunting and they just don't do it, or whether they do and it misses a little bit. I see it with what I'm trying to do here, obviously posting and things like that. What's your perception on that?
It's a real double-edged sword, and I think the longer we go on with the platforms that are quite developed now, the social media platforms, the harder it is to to really cut through.
It really is, yeah.
Because, you know, none of the platforms out there are purely music platforms for a start. So, you know, if any of us are old enough to remember MySpace...
yeah, we are.
Which we are. So MySpace is actually a brilliant example of everything about social media, because it was enormous. It was the go-to place.
Yeah.
It was all about music. It was where I would go. If I'd heard a track by somebody and I wanted to find out more, I would go and find them on MySpace, listen to their stuff and whatever. Also, it disappeared. It went from everything to actually disappearing
thanks,
in
Facebook.
thanks Facebook, in the space of 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, really,
it was a really quick downfall. And what happened with that was that anyone that had built their audience, who had put content, tracks, anything on there, was all gone. So massive lesson learned, for one, is you can't rely on any one social media platform for your whole community and your fan base, because something can happen and can go in a heartbeat.
Crazy.
If TikTok gets pulled down in the US, which is still a thing that might happen, you know, loads of TikTok influencers and people are going to lose their livelihood straight away. So the lessons there is about actually building a fan base that you can communicate with, that doesn't just live on one platform, but you find your own way with it. The issues for artists having to endlessly create content is a serious issue, and it's one where the perceived wisdom of what you're supposed to do seems to change over time as well. So, you know, it used to be you've got to post something once or twice a day. You've got to release music every 4 or 5 weeks. Crazy. Otherwise, people are going to forget who you are, blah, 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 blah. And now that's being pulled back again because it's overwhelmed. There's too much. Also, bear in mind, you know, building a big audience, like a big numbers of followers is meaningless unless they actually engage with you.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of ways of gaming the numbers. You know, like people used to game the numbers on YouTube.
Say, there used to be a big people pay for the followers, didn't they? Yeah, that was a big thing for quite a while.
Yeah, it was a big thing for a while, and not just sort of on Facebook and Instagram. It used to be the same on YouTube. And there was a laziness a little bit where, you know, it was, we called A&Ring by numbers, you know, A&R people sat behind a desk just looking at how many subscribers or followers somebody had and making their decisions about who to try and sign based on that. And it's swearing bullshit. Sorry.
That's all right. It's not for kids.
So, you know, if you're trying to market on a social media platform that isn't just music, and you're competing with other people's music, cats, recipes, all sorts of whatever is out there. If you actually track the difference between the number of followers that you have and how much engagement you have on a post and see the difference, you're looking at somewhere between 2 and a high single digits if you're lucky percent. So that then automatically reduces, you know, say you have 1 million followers, most of them are not going to see what you're posting. Yeah. Right? Yep. Either the algorithm is, you know, if they haven't posted enough recently, then the algorithm isn't going to show stuff in your feed. And, you know, and you might miss it anyway because you're scrolling through cat videos. So it's a minefield. I actually get cross with record labels continually sort of just judging an artist by their numbers rather than by their music. We actually signed somebody to Remarkable based on, I spotted that they said they had a track out on Facebook, and I went to listen to it, and it was really, really interesting, and followed up from there. They had no followers, or very, very few, because they used to be a dubstep producer and then they moved into drum and bass. So, you know, and also that person was very, very uncomfortable with their personal image and therefore didn't want to be posting the photos that get you noticed. The stuff that people will click on Instagram is always, if you post your face, then you will get more engagement than if you post pretty much anything. I mean, it's just crazy, but that's you know, it picks that up. So and they didn't want to do that, which is fair enough. But it's, then it's a hindrance to social media campaigns or whatever. It is a minefield. And I feel really, really sorry for artists thinking that they have to spend more time than necessary creating content. I genuinely think that shouldn't have to be the case. Just to feed the algorithm, you're probably better off just setting up a mailing list, gathering email addresses of people who come and listen to you DJ or play live or whatever it is. You have to get a lot more creative, but own your own fan data rather than relying on just throwing content out there and hoping some of it sticks.
Maybe that's an opportunity for a business if anyone's listening and fancies an investment. Is a social media platform purely for music?
I mean, I don't think it's an accident that we don't have a mechanism on any of the platforms, any of the main platforms, for genuinely sharing music in a nice way. So Instagram, for example, obviously they don't let you put a URL into the copy of what you're doing. You have to do link in bio, and then that links through to a gazillion different steps to actually, trying to do a pre-save, trying to get through a pre-save on Instagram. You've probably got, if you're an Apple Music subscriber like me, you've probably got at least 5 clicks. And even then, sometimes you're not quite sure whether it's worked.
And then once again, you give up halfway through, you're going to lose a lot of people there.
It's gatekeeping, but I genuinely think it's on purpose gatekeeping, and a social media platform that was just, for people that care about music, that want to be able to share a link. If I want to share a track that I think is great, my dream would be I can share my link from Apple Music, and a mate of mine can pick it up who uses Tidal, and they can just click on a link and it will take them to the tune. I suppose
you've got SoundCloud, which is probably the
closest. That's the closest.
That's just, but to actually, there's no social media element to that, is it? It's just, here, I've put my song up, people can listen. But if you don't know who I am, you're never going to find it. So scrolling through videos of people promoting, that doesn't exist. So maybe the blend of the two.
The blend of the two. I mean, we end up just setting up WhatsApp groups of people that we know love the same sort of music, and then just putting our recommendations in there. But then even then, you've got some people on Spotify, some on Apple, some on Tidal, some on YouTube. So, it's, business opportunity out there. If I wasn't old and doing other stuff, then I'd probably want to try and figure out how to do that. Because I think music's so important, and being able to properly recommend and share things as frictionless as possible would be enormous, and it would help artists actually get more plays. Now, there are a ton of really clever people that are developing different streaming platforms that have much more of that social element to them. And, they're the sort of people that I get excited about and want to help support, because I think if someone can actually nail that, it would be brilliant for the industry outside of the major labels, because they don't need that. They've already bought Spotify. Basically. Anyway, she says, being a bit political. But so for the independents and for emerging artists, it would be great to have more platforms that really help bring people together with the music that they like. And discovery. Now, Bandcamp does discovery stuff as well. Bandcamp's editorial is really good. So that's, SoundCloud, Bandcamp. There are ones that are sort of doing bits of it. Nobody's nailed the ecosystem, the social and the music.
Obviously, you are seeing a lot of people like TikTok, and I don't want to spend too much more time on this because we've got so much to cover and so much more important stuff. Let's be honest. I'll say that anyway. But you look at the likes of TikTok, you look at the likes of YouTube. Obviously, they now have got TikTok's got sound on. Obviously, they've got big focuses on these artist/label services. But once again, you know, we're coming back to the point of you're just stuck in the middle of cat videos and this and that. You know? Do you know anything of what they're doing internally and how that's supposed to be benefiting everyone out there, or is it not going to?
The platforms that I've seen that are actually doing good stuff to actually really try and help artists to build on their audiences and find other fans or find other sort of interesting ways of marketing themselves. They are the likes of Beatport and SoundCloud and Bandcamp. I can't speak to TikTok that much myself because I don't like it, so I don't use it. I know that it can be incredibly helpful and useful, but also you can end up as a label having to pay a lot of money to an influencer just to do a silly dance to your track, and that drives me mad. So I don't think those sorts of platforms are yet doing enough. And I think some of the platforms where they are offering opportunities for artists to get their music onto platform, they don't have enough infrastructure to actually help support the artists with the questions that they have or learning more about the industry that they're operating in. Often a lot of the back end is sort of automated. So if you come up with a problem, there isn't a person that you can speak to. There might be an email address, and if you're lucky, you get some kind of help. So yeah, it's with some of the sort of volume platforms, that can be a bit of a challenge. Of course, they can help you get your music onto Spotify, but where is the ongoing value? Just putting your music on a platform, that's not a guarantee of anything. It's just,
I just adds to the 100,000 tracks a week that I mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of music out there. I don't have a problem with the fact that there's a lot of music out there. I do have a problem with people assuming that a lot of it is going to be shit unless it's signed to a label, because that's absolutely not true. There's a lot of great music that is self-released, not yet signed to a label. Maybe they don't ever want to sign to a label. I was
going to say, that's more comes down to personal want and desire as well. Obviously, I know you've got a great background with AWAL, Artists Without a Label. Tell us about your time there.
Oh, that was amazing. Actually, I always feel really fondly about my time at AWAL because it was a time where the recorded music side of Cobalt, which was the umbrella company, was really growing. The team was growing. We were working with tens of thousands of independent artists and labels going through the distribution tier, but then also we had our sort of mid and top tier where we were working with artists like Little Sims and Nick Cave and people that are household names. And it was great. It was artist friendly. So BMG and Cobalt, they used to sort of argue amongst themselves as to who it was that really invented that sort of artist-friendly fair model, but the principle of it was right.
Yeah, good.
And it was, it was great fun, and we really made an effort to help with the support side of things. So, we had teams of people that we would train up to help answer the questions that artists would come to us with and give them advice. And we created newsletters to help them to build an audience or help them figure out where they should be planning their tour and all of that kind of stuff. So they were really, really good, happy times.
I can see why you and Alex are friends. Yeah, honestly, just speaking to him and speaking to you, the passion in sort of kind of helping these independent artists is so obvious. It's a beautiful thing.
I mean, that's the absolute driver is wanting. There were so many talented artists who are also, they're not just talented in the music creation side, they're committed, they're lovely human beings, they're smart in terms of really making an effort to learn about the industry. And if they're not, streaming 1 billion on Spotify, it's not because their music is shit. It's because they haven't been in the scenario where they've been able to actually grow and have a sort of either the financial backing or just enough help from the ecosystem to support them.
I was going to say, one of the things that Andy McDougall said on our last podcast was actually, he was kind of making a point of like when he releases his own music, and he said obviously there's a lot of labels that naturally have their unique, their sound, their brand, right? So obviously if you kind of, and let's be frank, right, these days everyone's testing the boundaries with music. They're kind of the blur of genres is obviously becoming more grey, you know, the longer we go on, and obviously as music evolves. So what you're finding is people are trying to do their own original sort of sound, but in that category to an extent. But then when they submit to a label, they're like, yeah, but it's not quite us. Yeah. And obviously, if you're constantly trying to push this middle ground, developing this new sound, as I say, create your own unique tracks, there might not even necessarily be someone that will release it for you. And I think that's a big factor to take into consideration.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's funny because I have artists that have come to me and they've asked advice on exactly that question, that, you know, they say they've made a techno track, but then the next track that they're making is a drum and bass track, and then they might want to make a house record or an ambient record, whatever it is, and not, you know, the way that they create music and what drives them isn't necessarily a single genre, or they want to experiment across the two, and they say, oh, you know, is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea? The advice that I give them is if you're going to make music and you are passionate about it, make the music that you need to make, and don't just make the music that you think you should be making because it will fit into somebody else's cookie cutter mold, because then it won't be authentic. And there may well come a point where you sit there and think, but I really wanted to make this over here, and I ended up doing that to be commercially successful or to do what the label wanted, and it's not working for me, for starters. You know, labels that will specialise in just one genre, you know, it's really good on the one hand because it's brilliant for creating and fulfilling a brand and building a community because people know what they're going to get. But sometimes you need to just be flexible enough.
Be yourself as well.
And, you know, it's like, you know, if you're a drum and bass label, you can release garage records as well, or you can release some hip hop, or you can release a grime record or whatever, because, you know, it's not like everybody that listens to that genre is going to go, ooh, what is this garage that you're throwing? And there are intersections in terms of fan bases, and they're actually, I think, broadening out now.
Well, you get a lot of sub-labels, don't you, as well? That's obviously where a lot of that sort of diversity comes into
exactly
place.
And that's a brilliant idea. Rather than turning something down because it's not quite what you do, then think about whether you can create a home for it. You know, Remarkable hasn't ever got big enough to do that, but from the start... From the start, we were like, okay, so, you know, the mission is dance and electronic music, but if we find something that isn't in that vein and we really believe in it and we really want to work on it, then we will have sub brands to be able to accommodate working with great music at the end of the day and not just closing the door on it. And I know, you know, more labels are doing that, and labels have historically done that. You know, going back to the major label side of things, I think that there are labels who used to have a really good brand and identity and then lost it along the way when they did start diversifying so much that, you know, Island Records is a good example because, you know, Island Records, if you spoke to people in the 70s, 80s, 90s, Island was about reggae primarily, but then, you know, and it had sort of adjacent music that sort of fitted, like folk and reggae. But then when they started just signing pop acts or guitar bands or whatever, you lose that sense of, you know, it could be on any label.
Of course.
And I don't want to single Island out. You know, a lot of labels have done that. There was a brand and there was a definite, people knew what it meant
to expect.
and what to expect. and then you diversify so much that actually it just ends up being a label, as in, just a tag, a word. And then you end up in situations like, Universal Music will turn around and say, okay, well, Island Records is now called this. Mercury is now called Virgin. And none of it makes any sense from a brand perspective.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So... yeah.
Well, let's come on to now. So obviously, we've really taken a dive into the independent side here, which obviously leads me on to things like Association of Independent Music, and also the Association for Electronic Music.
Yeah.
What were your goals with them? I know it's a very broad question, but obviously becoming a CEO, having finally after all this sort of kind of years of going, right, I want to help these people, I know what to do, now suddenly being put in a position where actually you can kind of be vocal about it. What was your goal? What was you looking to do? Or did you achieve it?
Oh, good question. So what I was looking to do in both organisations, what I was looking to do was to represent the breadth of memberships of those organisations. With Association for Electronic Music, obviously it was about really supporting the dance and electronic music industry. As a sector that has often been seen as the kind of the naughty child in the corner rather than proper music. That whole argument, oh, well, unless it's played on a guitar, it's not proper music, it's just someone pressing a button. Bullshit. And obviously
sounds like vinyl DJs.
Button pushers. But yeah, I mean, I've dance music and electronic music literally was game-changing and life-changing for me, and I'm really passionate about it. So I wanted to make sure that it was put on the map as actually a very serious contributor to the overall global music industry, and not just something that people should turn their noses up at. So, just giving it that kind of, giving it a gravitas, but making sure that we were listening to the voices from the various different cohorts across the scene. Because at AFEM, which is what it's called, acronym, it's every vertical of dance and electronic. So it's everything from the DJs, managers, labels, distributors, live agents. It's the whole anything that's involved in dance music. Which is quite a challenge because keeping
There's
everyone,
a lot of people.
Keeping everybody happy all of the time, especially when sometimes actually where they're coming from it can be quite polar opposite.
Absolutely,
So one of the goals was to, I guess, to help with the collaboration and to encourage things that were cross sector, as well as at that point also the diversity aspect of it.
Absolutely.
There are areas of dance and electronic music that have ended up being very kind of straight white male. And given that really the roots of dance and electronic music were largely black and queer, if you're looking at the house and techno, and what was born from that, we needed to kind of remind people that actually the originators of original dance floors were a place where you could be whoever you were.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't okay, you're the wrong gender, or you're the wrong colour, or whatever it is. It was a melting pot, and a community of people that got together and danced together, irrespective of who they were.
Unity through music, right?
Right. Love, unity, community. That's what dance and electronic music is all about. So reminding some of the cohorts about that was really, really important. Reminding people that women make music too. They make good music, but they're really underrepresented. Making sure that there are safe spaces for everybody at clubs and festivals. So there were lots of those sorts of projects that we were working on when I was there. And there was a lot around DEI that came up at that point. Because, while I was there were some cases around people that had been sexually harassed by a big name DJ or raped by somebody, or
we all know the
there's all
stories,
sorts of those sort of stories. So it was kind of handling that and handling our position on that.
Absolutely.
And making sure that as an organisation you don't put up with bad behaviour. Then the AIM job, again, it's a very, very broad membership. The independent label sector now includes, individuals who set up their own labels, so entrepreneurs. It could be management companies who have management and a label, and maybe they also do publishing, all the way up to the very big, long-standing traditional labels that have been going for 40, 50 years plus. The mindsets are very different.
Absolutely,
which you'd probably expect. So again, trying to make sure that you're representing all of the cohorts, making sure that it's not just all about who has the loudest voice and the biggest pockets, getting what they want, which is a big challenge. I think two of the really big important things that we were campaigning on when I was there, AI and the impact of Gen AI on copyright and IP, that was huge. So that was really, really interesting to get together with the other trade associations and actually come up with a position for the UK music industry. And then also the streaming reforms were happening. So it was when Spotify announced their 1,000 stream threshold and all the kind of strings that go with that. Deezer had announced something similar. Then Apple announced their sort of slightly two-tier system around spatial audio. So, it was like buses. They all came along all at once. And then you're like, okay, so now the groundwork is shifting here. The economics is shifting, and we need to make sure that the changes are not going to harm the independent sector.
Absolutely.
And they're not going to hinder the development of emerging artists and talent, especially in those more niche, interesting genres of music that are not going to get onto a New Music Friday that easily or whatever. So, campaigning around that is something that I felt very passionately about.
Absolutely, and I think that's evidenced in your career, and certainly of late as well. And I think there's two huge topics that we'll come on to there. Obviously, AI being one, and then diversity inclusion separately. But if you don't mind me saying, a lot of this roles, should I say, sounds a lot like mediation. It really is kind of just taking the argument from both sides and going, right, let's find a compromise, people.
Yes.
Like, what were the biggest challenges you found with sort of kind of dealing with? Once again, was it the egos? Was it this? Was it that? What was the biggest thing that kind of come into play?
It is. In both of those roles, or that kind of role, that's sort of heading up a trade association, it is the managing of egos, and the trying to get people to collaborate rather than to work in silos. When I was at AIM, obviously having worked at BMG and AWAL with that sort of independent model, which was the artist-friendly, forward-thinking, multi-genre, working with artists, from tiny to big sort of global superstars. I found myself in a situation where that was the independent sector that I was familiar with. Yeah. But it was, it was not the way that some of the more traditional indie sector felt about the indie sector.
Yeah, fair.
So there was kind of maybe a lack of knowledge about how the broader ecosystem of independence worked. There were assumptions that were made from one side to the other. There was a bit of a sort of us and them type thing going on. And that, so trying to help educate without people thinking that you were patronising, that was quite a challenge. There was a lot of persuasion, or trying to persuade. Not all of it worked. And it was at times very challenging. that was probably more so at AIM than at AFM, because that, you know, with dance and electronic music there is just a sort of more natural camaraderie within the genre, because it felt a little bit like everyone's sort of generally trying to move in the same direction, which is championing our music.
Yeah.
And
I suppose you've got that sort of kind of thing that does bring them together by that, right? But obviously then at AIM, you've got anyone and everyone, and nobody really cares what other people think. Right?
Anything and everything. Yeah. So, you know, you had independent classical labels saying that they weren't being represented enough.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, you know, you had the large labels feeling that we were putting too much emphasis on helping the small and emerging labels and the developing labels. So, you know, it was literally, you know, you sort of can't win, and you need to develop quite a thick skin and be political in a way that I think I have subsequently realised is probably not for me.
Well, I think that's a beautiful transition then, to actually jump on, you know, the things you are passionate about and where you have been an advocate. And we'll hold off AI for a second, because obviously that's a horrible word for everyone these days. So, you know, whenever you talk to someone, if you go on LinkedIn for 2 minutes, someone's moaning about it. We'll come on to it in a second. But for me, one of the more important things, and thank you for sort of kind of bringing it up a second ago, is diversity, inclusion, and obviously these underrepresented artists, whether it's their general makeup, their DNA makeup, or whether it's actually the type of music they're doing. You know, what are you doing? Well, actually, now let's take maybe a step back. What progress have you seen in this arena? Obviously, you've been in the industry for a long time now. Is it getting better?
Yes, it's getting better.
Good to hear.
Let's start with the good news. It's definitely getting better. It's far from perfect, but it's certainly, you know, from where I started, in certain areas, it is more representative in certain ways. I think there is one area where I feel we are going backwards rather than forwards when we're talking about diversity, and that's actually socioeconomic background.
Okay, fair.
Because the statistics are showing that for working class musicians, it is, and actually working class industry people, it's harder to get that route in, because of not having either the right accent or the right background, or just the bank of mum and dad to be able to fund you. And the statistics are kind of showing that the proportion of people from disadvantaged or working class poor backgrounds is diminishing within the music industry. And that is something that I feel very strongly about, because that's the sort of background that I came from. So, you know, I feel passionately that irrespective of where you live or what your parents do, who you are, how much money you've got, if you've got talent, you should have the same access to be able to try and get into the industry, whether it's as an artist or as an industry person. So that's an area that we need to do a lot of work on. But when it comes to finding and representing talent from different ethnicities, different genres, different non-UK genres, is improving. Good. There is some signs that some statistics that are going in the right direction for women in female artists. Obviously, in pop. Women are smashing it. Right? I mean, you know, hands down. And last year was amazing for big pop female artists. Absolutely smashing it globally.
Girl power. Thanks for the
Girl
Spice
power.
Girls.
Thank you. Thanks, Tay-Tay and Sabrina and Rihanna and Chapel Roan and all of these people. But when it comes to genres outside of that, there's still really an imbalance in terms of the number of female producers, the amount of airtime that they get, the amount of placements on playlists. There was actually a really good report that Jaguar did a couple of years ago looking at female and LGBTQ representation on radio, TV, streaming platforms, and the statistics were quite stark. So that's something that needs to be monitored, and we need to find ways of supporting that talent.
Of course.
And then, you know, if you're going to cast the net further around disability and neurodiversity, people, there needs to be a lot more understanding about neurodiversity in the artistic community. Absolutely. And realising how certain behaviours manifest, realising not to try and bully a creative neurodiverse artist into being good at admin, because trust me, it ain't going to happen. That's not what they were born to do. And yeah, there are different ways of having to help support people with neurodiversities. I mean, let alone disabilities. I mean, that's disabled artists. That is hard. We need to do so much better than that. Physical disabilities.
Absolutely,
it's just, it's actually quite pitiful, and it's not because disabled people don't make great music, but you know, everything from touring to being able to access buildings to go meet with labels and whatever. I mean, it's just...
For most nightclubs themselves these days, if you just want to go out, aren't even accessible themselves.
Exactly that. And, you know, thankfully, there are, again, some very smart people that are building some really good app technologies to help with that.
I think, I think it's Fabric. I might be wrong, and I hope I haven't quoted the wrong nightclub, but they've partnered with a company to do the vibrating floor.
They have.
So deaf people. It is Fabric, isn't it? Yes, good.
Yeah.
What I thought was absolutely fantastic. Deaf people going to a rave and you can't hear it, but you can feel the floor vibrate. Amazing.
Yeah.
What a cool initiative.
That is the sort of thing that we need. You know, we need to have accessibility in all its forms for people that want to be able to engage with live music and clubbing. And we're not there yet. And there's a lot of training that needs to happen in some venues as well to understand how to deal with people that are already disadvantaged just in how they can approach engaging with music, and not making it harder for them,
of course,
but finding good ways to make it accessible. So yeah, it's got a lot better. I hope we're not going to have a downturn, given the way that the world seems to be going with this whole kind of anti-DEI thing that's coming out of the States and various places at the moment. We have to push back on that.
Absolutely.
Because music is something that it's listened to by everybody, and it's made by everybody. Yeah. And we should celebrate that.
And it's even the small adjustments as well. Excuse me. Right, I was watching your SIP talk, or SIP or SIP talk, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned, which I honestly, when I heard it, I was just like, you know what, that's such a small thing, but can make such a big difference. And you mentioned about if you book a female artist, help her get home.
Right.
Just so she's safe.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that just seems so obvious. And I appreciate, there's probably going to be people out there that are going to get their grandma washed and be treated differently, but come on, it's the day and age we live in, right? Let's be honest, if you put a man and a woman out on the street, which one's probably going to get the cosh, right? So just little things like that, I think, can make such a big difference. And not to come right back to you, but I look at what you're doing with Remarkable. You know, what are you doing to try and support the sort of the diversity and all the above of what we discussed?
Well, I think, pushing for things like that, making sure that women will be safe, making sure that LGBTQ people will be safe, because we still do live in an environment where, unfortunately, that isn't a given. At the end of the day, if 2 or 3 women a week get killed by a man in this country, which is nuts, then don't book somebody to DJ at 4 o'clock in the morning in a city that they don't live in, and then not make sure that they've got travel and accommodation covered.
Crazy, right?
Or safety. And
it just seems like common sense as well.
It is common sense. And then, if you dig into intersectionality as well, what unfortunately we often still find is that people will be paid less or offered less if they're female, or if they're female and a person of colour. So redressing that balance and making sure that actually, if anything, overcompensating for the fact that often people will be offered less. Making sure that actually it's a level playing field in that regard, and understanding that quite rightly people will ask to be paid because they're probably earning less generally than their male counterparts. And also, being conscious about neurodiversity. So when we started Remarkable, our first artist, we didn't realise at the time we first started talking to her because it was over email or whatever, but she was transitioning from, male to female, which was, it's quite a tough process physically.
Absolutely, of course.
They also have health conditions, including what's it called? Something acusis, where you basically hear everything all of the time. We'd go and sit in a pub. They would be distracted by every conversation going on around them, even on the other side of the pub. So you have to then understand environments that work for them. They had other physical issues in terms of being able to travel, needing to be accompanied. Then every other artist that we've signed, we realised was neurodiverse after, not at the time of signing, but afterwards. So then it's supporting and understanding what works for them in terms of communication, what works for them in terms of understanding what we're trying to help them to learn industry-wise. So, it's just, figuring out the beautiful uniqueness of every person that you deal with and how best to support that person and their needs, and not thinking, oh, well, if it's good enough for Joe Bloggs up the road, it's good enough for Jane, because that's not how it works.
So obviously, until the day comes when everyone thinks like that, is there any advice you have for an independent artist who sort of kind of falls into, I hate to say the word category, but into that sort of kind of realm, that maybe they can take steps themselves to help navigate what might happen, or, make it a bit more equitable in many ways?
I think that advising people to... okay, let's take if you're offered a gig or if you're offered a piece of work and you're offered a certain amount that you're going to be paid, ask the question. If you're a woman or if you're a black person, am I getting paid the same as other people? And if not, why not? Now, I know it's easier said than done sometimes because, women in particular were not supposed to ask awkward questions and blah, blah, blah. And people think that they can get away with paying us less. But unless you ask the question and challenge it, things don't change. You can ask in a nice way. Absolutely. And actually, if something isn't going to work for you, then you can turn it down and say, sorry, but, that's not for me. There are other things as well that people can do. There are things that male allies can do, which is to have a diversity rider in their contract. Big fan of that idea, which is actually, if you're going to be booked for a festival or a club night, to say that there needs to be representation of women and BIPOC people on the lineup, so that it's not just a bunch of white men.
Of course,
again. So, there are a number of things that people can do, but I think, and ask around in your peers as well, because a lot of the word of mouth is how people end up finding out how they're being shafted.
Pretty much.
So, it's like, be that person that will share the information with other people and help and give them advice, because we can all help give advice to our peers and people in the ecosystem. And also, if you're a woman, don't be one of those women that just thinks, okay, well, I'm doing all right, so I don't want anyone else on my patch.
Don't rock the boat.
It's just like, no, I'm not going to help them because, and fear of competition kind of thing, which can happen. Don't be that person, because, help all boats rise. That's what we should be aiming for.
Cool. I'm going to ask a question. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate in any way, but I know it's going to be something that people are going to ask, right? Should someone from a diverse background be picked over someone potential? I'm not necessarily saying but someone that has maybe a bigger following or potential, or is considered more talented, just to do the diversity. What's your take on that?
I think that people should be booked based on their talent. Absolutely.
Fair.
I always think that. I think where the issue comes of people thinking, oh, well, you know, you're only booking them or hiring them because they're a woman or
that's
because
always
they're
a
black,
concern, right?
that's always a concern, and it's an argument that comes from people who say,
quite frankly, I have no idea.
they have no idea, but also they're living in denial of the fact of white male privilege, because if, you know, we wouldn't have to be talking about you know, making sure that things are diverse if there was a level playing field and that always existed. But we don't live in that society, and we don't have the level playing field because 51% of the global population are female, but they don't have 51% of the contracts and the money.
Do you have interest, though? Sorry, not to jump in. Apologies for jumping in. Would the ratio of producers, like if you actually look at how many, say, electronic female producers there are and electronic male producers, do you know what the ratio is for that? Obviously, we're talking 50-50 in general, but is it equal amount in actual people trying to get into the industry?
In terms of people trying to get into the industry, yes. So people coming into the industry as industry workers, the pipeline coming in is about 50-50.
Amazing. Okay, that's good to hear.
50-50 in terms of gender. We're not there quite in terms of representation of black and brown people.
Okay.
And the way that I always look at that is looking at the percentage of the overall population.
Yep.
So I think, you know, in London, we're somewhere around 47% of Londoners are not white.
Yep.
So if you're setting up a business in London and you don't have any black people or brown people working for you, then
something's wrong.
Then something's wrong. And you know, and please don't tell me that it's just because you can't find any that are good enough type thing, because I'm sorry, you're just not looking hard enough. And the same applies for you know, for women and LGBTQ. The numbers for LGBTQ as a proportion of the population are actually a little bit trickier to find. But if you dig hard enough, then you will. And I did when I did a presentation about DEI at an AGM a couple of years back. And I hit people with the stats, because we looked at the statistics. We surveyed the membership and looked at the stats, then looked at actually what, you know, the population stats, and the disparity was ridiculous. It was still a lot of middle-aged white men. And it's not because only middle-aged white men or white men are the ones that have talent. It's just the way that things have grown, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because there's an unconscious bias where you tend to hire people that remind you of you because it's easier. You know, people gravitate to people that are like them. But when you're actually running a company or hiring people, the more diversity you have across that, diversity in all its diversity of thought, it enriches actually the creativity, and it also enriches the commercial success.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and it's been proven statistically that if you have more women in leadership positions or more black or brown people in leadership positions, your business will thrive. And actually, commercially, your statistics will be better. So, you know, it's not just a nice, fluffy tick box exercise. It's actually a smart business thing to do.
So has social media impacted this at all? Because obviously, I don't want to come back on that or dwell on it in any way. But obviously, being able to sort of kind of give a face to your music, being able to have an opportunity to build that popularity and working with the algorithms as they are, has that benefited them in any way when it comes to actually getting signed, or is that still a supplementary thing when it comes to actually choosing what talent you want to put on?
I think, I mean, there's, you know, the example that I think of is actually what happened during lockdown. Because during lockdown, people, you know, we couldn't go out to gigs and clubs and whatever else. So people were spending more time online.
Absolutely.
And it was during lockdown that I discovered a whole bunch of amazing female drum and bass producers and DJs that I possibly wouldn't have come across before. And they, you know, some of them were actually, you know, they were very good at playing the social media game, which you need to play in terms of just figuring out their engagement and building an audience and doing that. And I think actually it was really good for the scene because there was this whole kind of influx of talent that was being discovered, and then that discovery could turn into them having more opportunities to get signed by labels or to get on lineups for DJing. So in some ways I think social media has been helpful, but I think it was possibly just that combination of lockdown
the forced social media,
and forcing it into doing that. So I mean, I think it's still difficult for people that don't necessarily have a strong visual image themselves that they want to put forward. Of course,
once again, that comes down to the individual person, no matter what colour or creed they are, right? It's,
just
do they want to put their face on?
Do they want to put their
I know, I get daunted. It's so daunting. I mentioned to you earlier, one of the hardest things I have, and obviously I appreciate I'm a middle-aged white man, but like, honestly, just filming the intros for the podcast, just staring at a camera, it's horrible. It's I'm not a selfie taker. I don't run around with a camera every time I'm out or anything like that. And so just putting myself in, and as I say, that's like for a second, like once a month. But to do it all the time, I understand it. I understand how horrible it is.
I mean, it's horrible. Even if you're not sick of the sight of yourself or whatever, it's still, I mean, I post selfies on Instagram because I know that if I have any sort of point that I want to make, people are more likely to be served that post if it's got a mugshot of me rather than if it's got any other sort of image, even with the same sort of message. So it really depends what you're sort of trying to get across. But it's there's too much around image and what people look like, which again disproportionately troubles people from minorities, because there are some pig ugly artists, male artists and male DJs out there, but it hasn't hindered them and their career in the same way, because you don't get judged in the same way. I was
about to say trolls these days, right? The keyboard warriors that are just willing to go on and just cause absolute havoc. That's a horrible thing in every vertical, no matter what you're doing. But in this industry as well, it's like really stands out.
I mean, if you try to flip it around the other way, and you've got, like, say, Prince, who I can see concert, so Prince was a small but very handsome man wearing flamboyant clothes. But what was important about Prince was the music, because he was phenomenal.
Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely. But imagine if all Prince ever heard when he put a piece of music out there is women going, "Ooh, nice arse. Look at the jacket. Oh, I don't know why did you do your hair like that?" Do you know what I mean? And I get so cross because you've got amazing female artists and they put an amazing piece of music. There'll always be somebody, even if they're not trolling on purpose, there'll be somebody that kind of goes, "Oh, but you're so pretty," and it makes me cross. It's like, that's not the point.
Nothing to do
with it.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, if you're a model and people say you're pretty, fine. That's because that's what you do.
That's what they're doing. Yeah.
It's all about that. But when somebody is DJing or making music, performing music, it's about the music. It's not about their eyeliner. It's like, just use your ears rather than your eyes, for God's sake. And please don't judge people on what they're wearing, because that's a whole podcast for another day.
Well, look, I tell you what I do want to come back to is the neurodiversity element of it. And I know you've been very vocal about this, so hopefully you don't mind me bringing it up. Obviously, yourself, you've been diagnosed with ADHD. How does something like that, or should I say, how has it shaped your career and shaped the way you do things and how you sort of kind of mediate and manage and et cetera, et cetera? What was the impact it's had on your life?
The impact of being diagnosed has been incredibly positive. I'm 57 now, just turned, and I was diagnosed at 53.
Oh wow!
So it's very late diagnosis, and it that whole cliche of everything makes sense now. It's like, it's literally gives you the opportunity to look back at things that have happened or ways that you responded to things or things that you found challenging and you couldn't figure out why. It made sense of all of that. The good and the bad. So it helps me realise that, the workaholicness of me, the ability...
Hyper-focus.
So the hyper-focus, the very long hours, the feeling like I needed everything to be perfect all of the time, which then leads to getting tired and burning out. Understood all of that. Also, the flip side of understanding that, relationship building and networking, fantastic. Drop me into that and I'm happy, and I can do the human relationship things and the empathy. And I think it's helped with how I have managed people in the past,
Absolutely,
even years before I had any idea what neurodiversity was.
Understanding's the biggest battle, right?
It's just understanding. I mean, I remember when I was at Universal, and that was the first time that I was like building and managing a team of people, and neurodiversity was a word that nobody used back then. And, we weren't really aware of it, but I was very aware that not everybody in my team thrived in the same environment, doing the same things at the same time as everybody else.
Naturally.
And it was quite eye-opening that other people in the team would have issues with behaviours and they didn't realise either, but clearly there were people in the team that were neurodiverse. They operated in different ways, and I was always able to see the upside and try and help support that, rather than going, oh no, you all have to be here at 9:30 in the morning because them's the rules. Actually, if someone's going to come in at 10 o'clock but they're working till 8 at night and they're producing really good work, great. I don't, that's the thing to judge people on.
Absolutely.
The output of what they're doing, rather than the clock watching and the sort of monitoring, sort of micromanaging things. And, the other thing, I suppose, is not just that I can work on 17 different projects at the same time, but I find it difficult not to have about 17 different things going on at any given time because I get bored really easily.
I was going to say, if you're anything like me, so I was diagnosed just over a year ago. And I kind of tend not to dwell on it too much, but the ability to bounce from one thing to another, hyper-focus, bored. Next, hyper-focus, bored. Next, So that's what, to be honest with you, I've got a career in finance, obviously, outside of this. But for me, music was one of those things I've always had a driven passion for. And just being able to sort of do things like this, and even with the podcast, you wouldn't believe the amount of things behind the scenes. A bit of editing. Okay, now maybe I'll do a teaser. Maybe now I'll do this. But it comes out, and eventually it's all good. Hopefully, anyway.
No, and that's the thing. It all comes out eventually. But and the boredom thing. I mean, that when I look back at my career and people go, but you've done so many different things. I'm like, well, now I know that's the reason. It's almost like there's some sort of inbuilt 3-year limit on anything. It's like, okay, if I've done something for 3 years and I've got to the point where I'm not learning anything, there's nothing that, the dopamine hits have disappeared. The best thing for me to do is to move on and do something else because I've tried sticking with it and bored Silv is not it's not good for anybody.
That's a question for the husband.
I'm not at my best if I'm just sitting there grinding through something that is really that I could do standing on my head or that just bores the pants off me. It's not great.
Easy tasks is one of the hardest for me. If something's too easy, I kind of just either don't do it or leave it so long, and in the end you just rush it. It's just very frustrating.
Yeah, and deadlines. Deadlines are amazing.
You will leave till the last minute and then nail it. You are,
I didn't realise I was that person. I've become more, the older I get, the more that I am. But now I've actually got into my head, rather than stressing about it, because I know I can do it, then I'm just like, but it'll happen, it'll get done. It'll get done and it will be good. Yep. It's not just
you said this date, ask me on that date.
Yeah. I've got into the, asking people if they want me to do something. Okay, what's the deadline? What's the real deadline?
Yeah.
So give me the fake deadline, but give me the drop dead deadline, and I will absolutely have it to you by that point. Because I'm juggling all my other drop dead deadlines of my other 17 projects that I'm doing. So it's an interesting way to be. But also, it's there are a lot more of us than people imagine.
Yeah.
And in the music and creative industries, over-index on neurodiverse, so ADHD and autism. Compared with the national averages, there are way more people in creative work that are neurodiverse.
Well, it's funny enough. Like it's one of the, I'm hoping it's not it's in the works. But I'm actually trying to get someone from musical therapy on to have a chat about what goes on there, because I know with myself, and as I say, like I kind of consider like I've got ADHD, but I don't feel the far end of the spectrum, let's say. But I know if I listen to music, it settles me, it calms me down and things like that. Is that what drum and bass does to you?
Do you know what? Yeah, and I'll tell you a funny story. After I got diagnosed, I managed to get some ADHD coaching.
Okay.
To help me sort of, manage my lack of self-confidence, as well as just managing the things that you need to do when you're organising yourself, especially when you're a consultant. And the first session, when she found out that I was in the music industry, and obviously, there's a lot about white noise, pink noise, brown noise, and various things that are good for people with ADHD.
I go to sleep with rain sounds.
Yeah, I go to sleep with Tom Middleton soundscape every night. But she was saying, some people talk about playing relaxing music and ambient music. But what you might find is that actually faster paced music with lots of intricate drum patterns.
Yep.
And I looked at her and I said, well, I listen to drum and bass. Like, that seems to make a lot of sense. And after that point, she managed to weave drum and bass and that element into all of the coaching.
I get my most work done on hard house.
I mean, if I stick some jungle on, whatever it is that I need doing will get done, and it will get done with a smile on my face. And it's been like that for ages, even before I had any idea that I was neurodiverse. So there is absolutely something in that. And drum and bass and jungle, as weird as they might sound to other people, absolutely calm me down. And, there are different types of jungle and drum and bass that I will listen to for different situations. So there's some that if I need to feel empowered because I'm a bit anxious, I'll listen to Ed Rush and Optical. If I'm going somewhere and I feel like a bit sort of angry or the word, this is me, put my Dillinger playlist on.
I love it.
And then, if I'm just feeling really sort of, happy and full of the joys of spring, then I'll put some Hospital Records, beautiful kind of liquid, like New Tone on, or some Fab and Groove. So, yes, absolutely.
I absolutely love that.
There is a course, or a couple of courses looking at actually the relationship between types of music and different types of neurodiversity, which if I ever get the time, I'm going to go and do those courses.
That would be amazing.
Fascinating. We did a little bit of that at university, the psychology of music. Which was really interesting, about actually how the brain responds to different types of music, but also to musical structures and things like that. And I was so into that. And I'm really into neuroscience as well. So I want to combine those two things at some point.
There was a video that I saw, and it's been going around for absolutely ages. And I think it might have even been a clip from a documentary. It was an elder gentleman, and he had Parkinson's. And they asked him to sort of kind of pick up a glass of water, and he's like that. And then they stopped, put some earphones on him, and played, whether it was his favourite music or whatever it was. They gave him a second to calm down. The next thing you know, he's picking water up like that, and he shakes, obviously not completely, but they'd really sunk and just just his ability to even just move a glass to his mouth was just so profoundly improved through listening to music. And honestly, I remember watching it. I was like, wow. Like the effect that music can have on any scenario, but something as bad as Parkinson's as well, which is crazy.
Oh yeah, I mean, we learned, there were some case studies we learned about for people that had head traumas. And, some really sad cases where they'd lost their short-term memory. So there was this guy that every day he'd be visited by his family and every day would not remember who they were and not remember the fact that they had visited. So it was like in this sort of Groundhog Day loop, but through a kind of, a car accident. But get him in front of a piano and the memory of how to play the pieces that he knew how to play on the piano was absolutely unchanged.
There's an element of muscle memory there as well, right, I suppose.
Well, it's different parts of the brain affect different things. And there's something particularly special about music and the way that music can help people communicate who aren't able to verbally communicate, but they can communicate through music. And just the impact that it had, that certain frequencies has on calming people down or exciting people. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating.
It really is.
It's like the most fascinating language that we have globally is the language of music. And
I absolutely love that. Well, look, there's one thing I just want to quickly touch on before we sort of going to go on to what's next for the wonderful Silvia. And obviously, you've been a very sort of kind of big voice when it comes to AI. What do you see as the sort of kind of biggest benefits and challenges or pros and cons, let's say, for everything going on there right now?
So there are lots of pros around AI technologies, and I think it's really important that we don't just look at AI in the context of music and think, oh, this is all bad, get behind me, Satan, because it's not. Yep. There are AI technologies that help people, that help enhance how people create music. And will add extra tools to people who, that will just open up what they're doing in terms of production or just sort of creating new musics themselves as a human being, which is fascinating. There are lots of AI tools that will actually help solve the problems that the music industry has. Some of the structural problems like, metadata and attributing where the money from things should go and helping to kind of, deal with the sort of messiness that we've got in terms of the logistical part of the industry. AI is probably the technology that we will need to be using to identify purely AI generated music to keep it off the platforms. Because there are things that technology will be able to do that we either don't have enough humans together to be able to do it, or we just can't do it quickly enough. So there's lots of great benefits. The downside is that if we're not careful about protecting human creativity, if we let companies basically just scrape all of the music that's ever been written by humans, feed it into their system to churn out Gen AI music without permission, without compensating the creators at all, then we run the risk of lots of things happening. Obviously, it's already hard enough for most artists and musicians to make enough money from their music careers as it is, and get the money that is due to them. Let alone having to compete with Gen AI and somebody just being able to sit in their bedroom, put a prompt into some technology and come up with something that sounds like Taylor Swift. So that is a risk. And also is a risk that actually a lot of Gen AI music, and I've heard a lot of it, is absolutely dreadful. It's literally, if we think that there are humans making music that the world genuinely doesn't need to hear, try listening to some of that. I mean, it's gobsmacking. It's gobsmackingly bad. And, there can be a lot of it within dance and electronic music because you can argue that there are certain formulas that exist in certain genres.
For both DJs, they're definitely formulas.
I mean, there are definitely some formulas.
Structures, loops, all that, yeah.
You know, I mean, God bless tech house. Like tech house in the early 2000s, probably didn't take that much human creativity to make some of the tracks that I was DJing out. But at the end of the day, there is a risk. There's a risk, I think, with what the UK government are talking about doing. To try not to get too technical, but there's text and data mining. Which is basically allowing companies to be able to use existing text and existing data to feed the large language models of the AI technologies. And they're trying to introduce an exception, which would mean that music is an exception and people can mine that data for the large language models without having to license it, or having to ask the appropriate permissions from the people that made it. And it's dangerous doing that for the UK in particular, because the UK is a world leader when it comes to music. We have been for decades and decades. We punch well above our weight in terms of what comes out of this tiny little island and travels across the world. Why destroy something that we're already amazing at to try and build a technology that we're already behind on? Because the chances of the UK being a superpower in AI, given where the US and China already are,
of course,
just two examples. I think the horse is bolted out of that stable already, probably, and you would just be killing one brilliant industry to try and chase another one.
Yeah, agreed.
And it devalues everything that we are so good at in terms of music in this country.
And it's not just the industry as well, as you say. It's like the individuals that have put their heart, their soul, these labour of loves, what they do in making every single track, just to sort of kind of literally. And it is like, let's be honest, right? I absolutely agree with you, by the way, is that there's elements to it which I think are really opportunistic. But if you're literally going on, and I think it was Boomby and a few others, right? That you can literally go, right, write me a song in the style of X, Y, and Z. Yeah. So like, that to me is just absolutely crazy. And obviously, when you've got, and I hate to bring sort of kind of the counter sort of argument. Obviously, when we're talking about independent artists and being given this accessibility to start releasing and self-distribute and self-release and this and that, what we're doing is kind of giving with one hand and then taking with the other. Yeah. And so like now what you've got is you made it so easy for artists to release, but then so easy for other people to steal what they've released and release it themselves and then start making money. And if they've managed to work the algorithm, suddenly they're getting more plays, they're making more money, etc. So look, what do you think is a fairer way for it to be dealt with? And I'm looking at maybe trying to isolate this question for you, looking at streaming services, which is probably one of the most popular ways nowadays. What do you think is a fair and equitable way to sort of kind of make that work? Is there a resolution right now?
I think there can be an easy resolution. It's not actually necessarily even the process of somebody using a Gen AI tool to make a piece of music themselves, or for Gen AI music to exist, but it can exist and live in a different space.
Absolutely.
It can be labelled as Gen AI. If it is purely generative music, it can and should be labelled as that, so that if it sounds incredibly like a Taylor Swift track, for example, people need to know that it's not, right? Because of the impact that it has on her reputation and career and everything else. So it can live, it can exist, but I think existing in a specific place. And the same is, for people who aren't musicians, who want to use tools and a prompt and create something, I don't have a problem with that either. But that can also live on a different platform. And I think, a couple of the AI tool platforms that help people to create music using largely AI and a little bit of their own input, some of them do actually have an ecosystem where that music can be released to the other people that are on that platform. I don't have an issue with that. But if you've got platforms that are supposed to be supporting commercially released music from artists who are artists,
just original music,
and original music, then that's what it should be.
Yeah, agreed.
And, you know, obviously the danger with Gen AI music, if it doesn't hold copyright, then effectively it can be used for free.
It's crazy.
And then that then undercuts paying all of the humans that create the music. And that will be the death of the music industry as we know it now. A new music industry will grow up in its place. And that's probably going to happen anyway, not necessarily just because of AI, but because of where we've ended up with the economics of streaming and the fact that it doesn't work for the vast majority of artists. I think we are on the cusp of a different type of music industry growing out.
Absolutely.
Which is going to be, you know, looking at engaging with audiences and fans in different ways on different platforms. And hopefully it'll be less the all you can eat for a pittance and more if you want to enjoy the music that you like, then pay for it.
Fair.
And pay a fair amount for it. You know, moving to that I think would be a good thing. So there is a place for AI music, and being passionate about how great it feels creating a piece of music. I don't want to take that away from anybody.
Absolutely.
But equally that can live somewhere different, so that you're not wading through substandard, largely Gen AI created stuff that maybe only the person that created it and their mum would want to listen to it. And, you know, giving enough airspace to the people that are really, you know, making their life, the music is their life, and creating is their life. So hopefully we can find a balance.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, but you know, we need to battle for it.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, well, thank you for being such an advocate of it, really. Well, not an advocate for AI, but an advocate of dealing with it in the right way, should I say? Yeah,
and it's, you know, it's really complicated. It is really complicated, but at the end of the day, you know, taking something that somebody has created and using it yourself to make money out of it without crediting or paying the person that created it, whether it's music or anything else, I think is fundamentally wrong.
Agreed.
I know that's already happening with ChatGPT and technologies like that. I have a little bit of an issue with that as well, because it is putting other people out of work already. Copywriters,
absolutely.
You know, people that used to craft marketing campaigns or craft press releases, and now, you know, you can give an intern ChatGPT and they'll just you know, come up with something that somebody else has effectively put all the blood, sweat and tears into. So that makes me sound like a bit of an old fogey, but I haven't used ChatGPT because I actually like writing words myself. Thank you very much. So
between that and playing drum and bass, we're all good.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Well, look, thank you for mentioning it, sort of touching base on that. As I say, I really wanted just to sort of kind of just gloss over it in the nicest way, because I know it's a big thing for you and something that you're battling with. But what I am more excited about is what's next for Silvia Montello. Now, obviously, you've got Voicebox, you've got Remarkable. What I know we've already come on to Remarkable, obviously your label. What is Voicebox? What service, what are you offering there?
So I originally set it up when I left Universal, so in 2011. And at that point, because I'd been working in marketing, it was a marketing consultancy. Subsequently, because my career is now kind of, it went from marketing to operations and strategy and a lot more, sort of a lot more strings to my bow. It's now reflecting that. So where I can hopefully give back and be of value is to artists or labels, music tech companies, startups, by helping to advise them, whether it's advising them on the product or whether advising them on projects that they're doing, looking at, their sort of commercial and business strategy, helping them to figure out, how can you grow or how can you pivot?
Okay.
What opportunities out there do you not yet know about where I can help facilitate, like introducing you to the right people or just giving you ideas about other things that you can be doing that will fulfill whatever it is that you're looking for. So, it's still working on a variety of different things, more in the dance and electronic area.
Of course.
If, given half a chance.
Not bringing the classical back.
I would absolutely work on classical if, again, it's the beauty of it now is that if something comes along or, a company or a person or whatever, and they come along and there's something that will excite me and I feel that I can help them with, it doesn't really matter too much as long as I've got some sort of passion and energy for it. So
no one from jazz.
I love jazz.
I thought you said earlier you didn't like jazz.
No, I love jazz.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood.
No, jazz is good. Saxophone is the thing.
Ah, that's right.
So
sorry,
no more sort of Kenny G like saxophone players. Probably not traditional Irish folk. I'm really sorry, traditional Irish folk, but I just can't. I just can't. And screamo. I mean, I like metal. I like a lot of types of metal, but I think now I'm old enough to realise that the areas where I've got good knowledge, useful network, and useful kind of ideas that can really help people. So I'm not going to take a project on if I think that I'm just sort of winging it.
Yeah, fair.
And that if somebody else is going to be better off for it, then I'll happily actually introduce people to somebody else.
Love that. Yeah.
So, there are lots of great, knowledgeable consultants and small companies out there that can do things. And if they can do it better than me, then great. Or, working with other consultants and actually sharing a project as well. I could do certain bits well. If someone else wants to do the admin.
That's good work.
Then.
Well, look, I'm going to throw this over to you a bit more this time because I know you're working on a couple of quite exciting projects. Yeah. Can you tell me more, please?
I can. So, this year for me is a good one because last year, sort of started with these conversations with a couple of organisations about jungle and drum and bass and why has it not been celebrated? Why are you not covering it? Why are you not taking it seriously? And with both of those organisations, it was a kind of, let's make this happen.
Amazing.
So I pitched to IMS, International Music Summit in Ibiza, and the people that run that saying, look, I'm going to come up with a whole range of things that we could do around jungle and drum and bass. And I did that and I presented them with about 8 or 9 ideas. And they went for 4 of them.
Amazing. Congratulations.
So I've been curating the jungle and drum and bass strand for IMS in Ibiza, which is happening at the end of next month.
Yep.
And it's really exciting because we've got 3 panels looking at various different areas, the overview of the genres, but then also looking at how it's grown, how it's evolved, the demographics and the data, what the trends are, and how, since its early inception, how it sort of developed and gone through the sort of mainstream to underground, back to the mainstream, back to the underground, and just sort of celebrating it as a genre. And it's one of the most personally exciting things that I've worked on. And concurrently with that, also working on a project for the BPI as a spotlight and celebration of jungle and drum and bass.
Amazing.
So, and that event is going to be happening at Fabric on the 16th of April. Pulling together a whole range of different people.
This comes out on the 15th of April. So tomorrow, go now.
Go. Yeah. And it's really exciting being able to kind of just look at, inviting DJs, producers, MCs, label heads, people from, Beatport and distribution platforms, and just trying to get voices from across the scene to tell their stories and talk about the genre and how it's grown and why it's important and really to celebrate it. So,
wonderful. I can see how excited you are. I can see it in your eyes. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, by the way.
It is a fabulous thing. You know, the cliche: do what you love and love what you do.
Absolutely.
And I haven't. There've only been a few projects that I've worked on, like formally, when I was at the various record labels that were jungle and drum and bass projects. So being able to actually just immerse myself in it. Which literally this year I've barely listened to anything else, and I've gone like right back into the early stuff. So
who's your favourite artist? I know it's a big question. I wouldn't be able to answer it myself, so I'm not expecting you to. But is there anyone that springs to mind and go, yeah, that's the epitome of my childhood?
I mean, the favourite artist, if I had to pick a favourite artist overall ever, which is hard, I'd probably have to go for Prince.
Okay.
Because he had everything. I mean, literally, the production, he played every instrument, his voice is amazing, the musicality, he's like, the modern day equivalent of Mozart. The genius
dressed like
of
him as well, to be honest.
And dressed a little bit like him as well, you're not wrong. So, but it's so difficult for me because there's also Ella Fitzgerald, who is like, with my ex-singing hat on, I could listen to her all day, every day. I was expecting
someone from drum and bass, but no, tangent. Come right way off.
Electronic music generally... Underworld, because I've been into them for such a long time, and there's like live and recorded, they're amazing. I'm not even going to try and pick one out of jungle and drum and bass,
and also you're about to do a few events, so my favouritism isn't expected.
I mean, there are two artists that I've already mentioned where they're two of the only ones that I'm so fangirly about that I have found it difficult just to go up and say hello to them in a way that I can go and walk up to almost any artist and kind of say, I've walked up to Jimmy Page and had a conversation with him and all sorts of things. But there are a couple of drum and bass producers who, their sound connected with me at a time when it was like listening to the soundtrack of the inside of my own head.
Love it.
And that means a lot. And then that's when I get tongue-tied and feel like, I don't know what to say, other than, hello, your music means the world to me, and then feeling like an absolute idiot. So, but yeah, I mean, there's so much great jungle and drum and bass, I can't.
Well, look, it's nice to see you're back in it, and it's nice to see that you're making such an effort bringing it back and making this point of sort of celebrating it through the IMS and obviously what you're doing at Fabric and so forth. Moving away, well, we might not necessarily be moving away from drum and bass, but sort of kind of coming on to the last little segment of the show. What's next for Silvia? Obviously you've come away from AIM now. Obviously you've still got Voice Box, you've still got Remarkable. But is there any what's in your agenda? What's the plans?
I don't have a plan.
I love it. ADHD right there.
Right. I learned a little while ago that actually I don't know, my mindset has really changed now that my plan will be whatever comes along that is the right thing at the right time. And
you like to wing it. I love that.
At the end of the day, that's basically how things have sort of happened since leaving AIM and going back to consulting. It's almost sounding a bit like a hippie just for a moment. The universe seems to just kind of send some stuff along, and things or people or opportunities that I would never have imagined that sort of spring up or come to me or whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm going to run with that and see what happens. Not all of it is going to work. But also the beauty of what I've learned over the years is that failure is one of the best things that can happen to you, because it's how you learn. And it's also, it keeps you grounded, and it stops.
Sounds like there's a story there.
No, it just I don't know. I think, a lot of people grow up with a fear of failure. It's sort of drummed into you
Yeah.
about, you need to avoid failing, and it's all about success and hard work and blah, blah, blah. When you realise that actually you might fail at something either through no fault of your own or out of your control, or actually just because you've picked the wrong thing at the wrong time, or it just wasn't the right fit, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
You always learn something from that, and then you take what you've learned and you adapt what you're doing. If you're smart, you learn from your mistakes and you don't just repeat them endlessly, and you go in a different direction.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's happened with my career, it's not been like a nice sort of linear thing like that. It has been literally like a roller coaster. It's gone up and down and sideways and this and that and the other. But it's kind of ended up with me, making me
Absolutely.
who I am. So that sort of feels like my MO, and God knows where that's going to go.
But then also, like, it allows you to take advantage of the opportunities as they come, right? If you've got that set plan and something sort of out of the blue comes, it can seem like the wrong idea, when actually, if you looked at it from a bit further away, it could be the perfect thing to sort of really make or break it, or make you, not necessarily break you, but make you. And it's just a crazy. I'm a big fan of winging it. I think once again it probably is to do with the ADHD side of things. But I just look at the opportunities that come your way. Just be open to them.
Oh God, absolutely, because you don't know what's going to be around the corner. Which is why, trying to have a 5-year plan or whatever it is, it's like, how many times might you have tried to come up with a 5-year plan and it gets derailed one way or another? And you can spend a lot of time meticulously planning that out. And then if it doesn't work, you spent a lot of time and energy and it could really set you back. Yeah. Whereas if you go with the flow and you try things, one of my favourite sayings is, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Also, in for a penny, in for a pound. If I'm going to do it, then I'll try and do it, and I'll put my whole self into it. And if it works, then great. If it doesn't work, then I'll learn from it and I'll do something different.
Wonderful.
The only thing that would be nice to have in my plan is to do that neuroscience of music course. But I don't want to go into that and not be able to commit enough time to do it properly, because then I would be letting myself down. But yeah, no great plan. See what the universe throws my way and deal with it as I go along.
Love it. Well, unless there's anything else that you want to talk about, I do have one last question for you. And it's a question I've asked all my guests so far. And I quite like it. It gets taken in different ways. But what's the legacy that you want to leave behind? I know that's a very big question, but you've done so much already. But let's say in 100 years' time, people look back and are like, Silvia Montello, what did she stand for? What's the legacy she left behind?
It's going to sound cheesy. I think whatever the legacy would be, if it was, she was kind and she helped me out when I needed help, or she gave me good advice, or she was there for me when I was having a rough patch, that would make me the happiest person.
That's a beautiful answer.
Because that's what I want to do, both professionally and personally. I think I've been lucky enough somehow to muddle through a 35-year career in music as a woman with ADHD, and I've learned a lot through that, and I want to be able to give it back and help people out, and just be a decent person.
I like that. I love it.
A decent music industry person.
Yeah. Well, who cares? You know what? An answer like that doesn't matter about music. Just be a nice person.
Just be a good person. I mean,
don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick. Don't be a dick is rule number one, and rule number two in life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, and it's quite a simple rule.
Not many people get it.
It's amazing the number of people that just can't figure it out. Like, just treat people the way that you would like to be treated, and help people out, and support people that are coming through and developing and you know, people that have got talent within our industry, give them a hand, especially if they will be the sorts of people that maybe aren't, you know, the extroverts that will big themselves up all the time, or the ones that don't have all of the cards in their hand already. If you can help give people a leg up or give people the right sort of advice, it's the thing that makes me the happiest is just if I get a message from someone going, do you know what, you know what you said to me back then, that's really helped me, and thank you. That's it. That's, you know, that to me is everything.
Wonderful. There we go. Silvia Montello, the superstar of the music industry and just jolly nice person.
Thank you.
Sylvia, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate your time. I wish you all the best and good luck with IMS. Good luck with Fabric. If there's an invite there, let me know. But no, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely. Cheers.
And that's it for this episode of Beats Learning. Huge thanks to Sylvia for joining me and dropping some serious knowledge. If you liked what you heard, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who's into music, the industry, or someone who just loves a good story. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Ben Davenport, and I'll see you next time on Beats Learning.